With comics, retcons tend to go one of two ways. Either they're brilliant and manage to reinvent an old character in a bold new way while getting rid of bizarre story arcs, or they're just plain old bad, convoluted, and generally just quite regressive. No publisher has more experience with this old trope, arguably, than DC Comics. The company wrote the book on retcons during the Silver Age of comics back during the 1950s, where they retired many of their Golden Age figures to different parallel Earths. Years later, Crisis on Infinite Earths would completely reset the DC universe, cutting, ostensibly, through the chaff to deliver a more streamlined modern mythos. Over 3 decades and about a dozen more retcons since, and it's fair to say that the opposite effect has been achieved. I'm Ewan from What Culture, and here are the 10 most hated retcon changes in DC Comics. Number 10, Barbara Gordon is Batgirl again, the New 52. Seeing as how the New 52 was in itself a pretty seismic retcon, you should be warned that a lot of what follows draws upon that event. Starting things off, though, is Barbara Gordon, who found herself back in the Batgirl identity come the reboot. Why is this a big deal? Well, long-time Batman fans won't need reminding that one of the most pivotal events in Babs' history came in Alan Moore and Brian Boland's The Killing Joke. Gordon became the information broker known as Oracle after she was paralyzed by the Joker in that book, and went on to serve a pivotal role in the Bat family as the team's handler, providing some much-needed representation in regards to the disabled community. Fan-favourite writer Gail Simone had presided over much of Babs' development in the mid to late 2000s on Birds of Prey, and was immediately tapped to write the character in the New 52. Controversy would later follow when Simone was taken off the book, only to be brought back following a backlash, but the main issue still stemmed from the fact that Gordon's disability had been completely erased, depriving fans of a powerful symbol. Number 9, the Superboy Prime Punch, Infinite Crisis. There have been crises, both good and bad, but one thing that most fans can agree on is that Infinite Crisis was a bit of a doozy. Another event designed to streamline DC continuity, Infinite saw the introduction of the Superboy Prime Punch, which shattered reality and caused several convenient changes to occur. But by far the most egregious events came in the pages of Batman, which saw Jason Todd resurrected by Prime's attacks against the time stream. Later iterations of the DCU have retconned Jason's return, itself a retcon to begin with, retconception, Inception noise, to the far more believable and organic explanation that he was resurrected by Ra's al Ghul's Lazarus Pit. But the fact he's still alive is still a point of contention among Bat fans specifically. Number 8, no one can tell what has and hasn't happened, the New 52. Apologies to those who found their gateway to DC with the New 52, but the whole thing was basically a complete mess. Although it achieved a short-term resurgence for DC, so much of what fans came to love about the old reality was lost in the transition, and led DC to take corrective steps to change things back to how they were with DC Rebirth, with the prospect of further retcons still to come in Doomsday Clock. The New 52's problems were myriad and extensive, and resulted in issues both on and off the page. One of the biggest issues with the whole thing, however, was that despite the event having been planned as a clean break from the older continuity, no one could seem to tell what was and wasn't canon. Classic Batman storylines like The Killing Joke and Long Halloween remained, while others were stricken from the record. This pick-and-choose attitude ended up making the New 52's timeline somehow more confusing than its predecessors, nuking the old continuity and choosing bits and bobs that carried over whilst introducing a restrictive timeline in Justice League just made things so much worse. Number 7, your favourite heroes are actually awful. Identity Crisis. No Crisis seems to have more of a divisive reputation than Brad Meltzer's Identity Crisis. It was the first to boast no distinctive cosmic influence, but its retcons were no less seismic. The story was effectively a murder mystery centered around the death of Sue Dibney, the wife of the elongated man, who the book fridged horrendously. The Justice League tirelessly pursue every lead they can find, but only a select few know who the prime suspect actually is. Dr. Light. Meltzer revealed in his comic that, back during the League's heyday, Light was considered something of a serious threat. For the majority of his existence, the Teen Titans villain was portrayed as bumbling and incompetent, and Identity Crisis decided to account for this change by explaining how, after Light raped Sue Dibney in the Watchtower, Zatanna and a small number of Leaguers conspired to magically alter Light's personality. He would have no memory of the event, but Zatanna's tinkering resulted in a complete change in the villain's mind, transforming him into the joke character seen up until that point. Whether you think Identity Crisis added some much-needed ambiguity to some of DC's heroes or altered them for the worse, there's no denying just how controversial Meltzer's comic was upon release. Number 6, Hal Jordan is unaccountable for his actions. Green Lantern Rebirth. For some reason, even though DC possesses a veritable crop of genuinely brilliant and interesting Green Lanterns, every story just keeps coming back to Hal Jordan. The 50s era Space Cop has started his fair share of memorable storylines over the years, but when he was resurrected in 2005's Green Lantern Rebirth, praise was not exactly unanimous. Fans were frustrated by Jordan's return because many felt his story had ended with his sacrifice as Parallax. Moreover, other Green Lanterns like Kyle Rayner, Guy Gardner, and John Stewart had all risen to the task of replacing him, with the latter even commanding a sizable following from the Justice League animated series that was airing at the time. Looking back at it today, it's easy to see Rebirth for what it was, a nostalgic exercise determined to supplant those other figures and make Jordan DC's premier Lantern. Again, controversial enough, but there was another retcon Jeff Johns introduced that didn't sit well with readers either. Back during Emerald Twilight, Hal went a little bit off the rails. Driven mad by the destruction of Coast City, he attempted to remake it with his own power ring, only to incur the wrath of his fellow corpsmen, who he then promptly massacred. Jordan then took on the name of Parallax, but Rebirth changed it so that Parallax was an evil alien entity that possessed Jordan, making him completely unaccountable for the atrocities that he had committed. Number 5. No one can tell who Hawkman is, literally all of the time. Hawkman is currently in the midst of a brilliant series written and drawn by Robert Venditti and Brian Hitch, but even the most diehard of Hawk fans wouldn't dare try to claim that the character's history is easy to digest. Honestly, if you thought the X-Men were impenetrable, you should try giving Hawkman a read sometime. Retcons are both numerous and terrifying, and while the lack of permanence hasn't necessarily harmed DC's greatest bird-themed couple, sorry, Hawk and Dove, trying to figure out what is and isn't continuity with Hawkman and Hawkgirl is a daunting task. Carter and Shayera Hall have been reincarnated lovers from ancient Egypt, and sometimes intergalactic aliens from beyond the stars. Sometimes they've been both at the exact same time, with some retcons even going so far as to claim that they didn't actually serve on the Justice League, and that they were in fact replaced by imposters for several decades. Number 4. The Amazons are secretly evil. The New 52. If you want a lesson in how not to reinvent a mythos, look no further than the New 52's Wonder Woman series. Although there were positives to be found with Brian Azzarello and Cliff Chang's comic, it also introduced a retcon for the Amazons that had Wonder Woman fans positively furious. How so? Well, Azzarello, drawing upon old Greek myth to tell his new horror-laden series, decided to update the Amazons' origins so that they raped sailors on the high seas, murdered them, tossed their corpses into the ocean, and sold any and all sons born into slavery. Yeah. So, as far as retcons go, this one was just a bit nasty. Not content with revealing that Diana was actually the progeny of Zeus and no longer sculpted from clay, the writer transformed the Amazons from a noble warrior people into a horrifying force content with committing unspeakable crimes against sailors and their children. Number 3. Green Arrow and Black Canary's lost relationship. The New 52. DC has plenty of power couples within their pages, with Superman and Lois Lane probably able to stake a claim to the top spot. However, within the superhero community, there is one couple more iconic than any other: Green Arrow and Black Canary. Oliver Queen and Dinah Lance have been an item since the late 60s, to the point where it feels strange to tell a story about Oliver and not include his partner, and vice versa. And so, obviously, DC thought it would be a fantastic idea to get rid of their relationship for the line-wide reboot in 2011. Clearly, depriving Queen of Neil Adams' iconic Van Dyke beard wasn't enough, nor was bringing the main GA series in line with the decidedly dour Arrow TV show on the CW. For pretty much the entirety of the New 52, from 2011 to 2016, Ollie and Dinah didn't share so much as a kiss. Number 2, who are the Legion of Superheroes? Literally every decade. No shortage of reboots and rejigs have tried to bring the Legion back, and while a lot of them are enjoyable, it's meant that the Legion have found themselves in a similar position to Hawkman. No one knows what is and isn't canon anymore. There have been stories about clones, pocket dimensions, and even fully fledged comics based on new incarnations of the team altogether. Even Mark Waid, who presided over the main Legion book in 2005, was left frustrated in his efforts to tell a compelling Legion comic when the team from the 80s was reintroduced, supposedly without his knowledge. There was an explanation for how all these different incarnations of the Legion could exist at the same time, but it's so confusing that you'd honestly be better off just watching the Far From Home episode from Justice League Unlimited. Number 1, Wally West just doesn't exist, the New 52. By now, you've probably gathered that the New 52 was a bit of a thing, a huge frustrating mess of a thing, and while it most certainly did have some positives, those beloved elements and characters that failed to survive Flashpoint left a blot on its legacy. Ask any fan which character they felt was most missed, and it's always going to be Wally West. Wally was DC's main Flash for over 2 decades, and the original Kid Flash. His jokey demeanor and strawberry blonde hair endeared himself to readers in no time at all, and cemented the Flash as one of the superhero genre's most successful legacies. Barry Allen's return in Final Crisis made for one of the comic's best ever moments, but little did fans know that it would spell certain doom for Wally. Barry became the main Scarlet Speedster in the wake of Flash Rebirth, and when the New 52 came around, Allen was the only Flash to survive the trip. Several years and a replacement Wally later, and DC made amends for their mistake by making West the sole survivor of the old continuity, and the one who heralded the beginning of the publisher's rebirth in, well, DC Rebirth. Here's hoping he's back for good.